Hello everyone, Professor Kurzluck here. So as we learn more about the US and Israel strikes on Iran and then Iran's retaliatory strikes, one thing that I do think is missing from a lot of the analysis and a lot of the writing is how this conflict, how this war will impact the Russia-Ukraine war. And that might seem like a distant connection, like maybe they aren't super closely related, but I do think we should spend a little bit of time thinking about how this conflict does impact the Russia-Ukraine conflict, especially because of Iran's support for Russia, Russia's supposed support for Iran, which hasn't really materialized over the past couple days. And we know that Iran has supplied a lot of drones to the Russian conflict. So I wanted just to make a video spending a few minutes, 10 minutes here, thinking about how this all comes together. So we know that the recent strikes on Iran and the resulting instability inside the Iranian political system they're not going to just be a regional Middle East story. Instead, they are directly connected to Russia's strategic position, and this is going to play a role in how Russia can fight their war in Ukraine. We know this will impact militaries, economies, geopolitics will be impacted. So what matters in Tehran over the coming months could meaningfully alter Moscow's war effort in Ukraine, its regional influence, and even broader confrontations with the West. So to understand why, we should begin with the relationship between Russia and Iran and their ongoing partnership. So over the past several years, and especially since 2022, Iran has become one of Russia's most important strategic partners. This relationship really intensified after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Under heavy Western sanctions and facing shortages in key military technologies, Moscow turned towards and to Tehran for support and for help. Most notably, Iran supplied Russia with large numbers of unmanned aerial vehicles, particularly the Shahed 136 loitering munition drones. So if you've watched the news over the past several days, you have encountered these drones being used to strike other Middle Eastern countries. Some strikes in the Middle East the Shahed drones are being used. So if you're just following the news and maybe you haven't really followed the Russia-Ukraine conflict closely, you're now seeing these drones being used. So these drones in Ukraine have really played a central operation role in Russia's campaign against the Ukrainians. They've been used extensively to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, energy facilities, and even urban centers. So they're relatively low cost and mass production capabilities make them sorry, my dog is sneezing, make them especially valuable to Russia, which needed a way to sustain long-range strikes without exhausting their more sophisticated missile stockpiles. So over time, cooperation reportedly expanded beyond simple transfers. Iran provided technical expertise and design assistance that enabled Russia to establish domestic production lines, including facilities across the Russian Federation, all based on these Iranian models of drones. So this drone partnership created a direct military link between Tehran's industrial capacity and Moscow's battlefield operations. So, in other words, Iranian stability has had tangible consequences for Russian military effectiveness. And that is why the current instability in Iran does indeed matter for Russia. We have seen the Kremlin, although seemingly a bit quiet, have put out some statements criticizing the West, criticizing the US and Iran. And so if we think about this relationship, we know there has been this relationship burgeoning over the past several years. So the strikes on Iran and the reported disruption or removal of senior leadership figures, which we know several leadership figures have been killed, has introduced significant uncertainty into Tehran's political landscape. If Iran experiences a leadership transition, which we don't know what that would look like, but if they do experience a leadership transition, whether towards a more pragmatic faction or towards internal fragmentation, the consequences for its external commitments, especially to Russia, could be substantial. So we know there are several potential pathways that this could go. First, if Iran descends into internal political instability or maybe elite fragmentation, its ability to maintain consistent external military supply chains could weaken or even could be shut off. Even if Russia now produces drones domestically, those production lines remain rooted in Iranian designs, technical cooperation, and, of course, supply networks. So disruptions in Iran could slow production, increase costs, and complicate logistics within Russia. So for Russia, that would translate into reduced flexibility in sustaining drone-heavy strikes in Ukraine, like we've seen over the past several months. Second, if a new Iranian leadership seeks international de-escalation or maybe even sanction relief, it may reassess the political costs of being seen as materially supporting Russia's war effort. Drone transfers have been one of the most visible symbols of Iran's alignment with Moscow. Western governments have repeatedly cited them as evidence of Iran's complicity in Russia's aggression. A pragmatic leadership looking to reduce isolation might scale back such cooperation, even if quietly. And third, Russia faces reputational and geopolitical risks. Moscow has positioned itself as a defender of state sovereignty against Western intervention. If a close strategic partnership experiences leadership upheaval, following external strikes, it raises uncomfortable questions about Russia's ability to shield or support allies. This has signaling effects beyond simply Iran. In Syria, in parts of Africa, and across broader networks of states that view Russia as a counterweight to U.S. power. So, with all of that said, the picture is not entirely negative for Moscow. Regional instability in the Middle East tends to raise global oil prices. Already, if you're watching the news today, you see discussions about what's going to happen with oil prices over the next several days. As a major hydrocarbon exporter, Russia benefits from elevated energy prices, especially under the current sanctions pressure. So short-term spikes could provide some fiscal relief in the Kremlin. However, these gains are contingent and probably temporary. They do not offset the long term strategic value of a stable, cooperative Iran that participates in energy coordination. Um, so, that is one thing that we will have to pay attention to over the next few days. What's going to happen with oil prices? Will that create an opening for Russia to fill? Will countries start to look to Russia to export more to their country? So there is this issue of strategic durability. If hardliners consolidate control in Tehran and double down on anti-Western alignment, Russia may retain a close partner. So Russia may gain in the short run through higher energy costs, and we don't know who will take over power in Tehran. This could create a closer relationship between Iran and Russia. If pragmatists consolidate control and seek detente in the West, Russia does risk being at least partially, sidelined in Iranian foreign policy recalibration. And if Iran experiences prolonged internal instability, Russia could lose not only military cooperation with like the drone program, but also years of investment in infrastructure and regional influence. So, in short, Iran's internal trajectory, their internal political trajectory, now intersects directly with Russia's external strategy. The drone connection makes this relationship operationally concrete. Iranian factories and engineers have influenced the tempo of Russia's air campaign in Ukraine. Political shifts in Tehran, therefore, will ripple outward into European security concerns. And at the same time, Russia's diplomatic positioning in the Middle East depends on stable partnerships. Leadership uncertainty in Iran tests the credibility and resilience of that network. So, what we are witnessing then is not just a regional crisis. It is a reminder of how interconnected contemporary conflicts have really become. Domestic instability in Iran can alter the battlefield dynamics in Ukraine. Leadership transitions in Tehran can actually reshape Moscow's strategic military calculus. And external strikes in the Middle East can reverberate through Eurasian politics. So for Russia, the stakes are therefore quite significant. The future of the Iran-Russia partnership will help determine not only the trajectory, of Middle Eastern politics, but also the sustainability of Moscow's war effort and its broader confrontation with the West. And that is why what is happening in Iran right now does indeed matter a lot for Russia, even if it's not being covered as much in the news we're watching right now. So I just thought it was worthwhile making a video on that because it's something I've really been spending the day thinking about how the conflict in Iran will shape the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So thank you.